Hi, so today I'm going to be talking about my research presentation. So for my research question, I have why do deaf children struggle learning English? So first, for the first slide, we have the linguistic minority. So what I did with my presentation is I broke down each section of my paper and only am going to be talking about the main points that I've made in my paper. So for my first main point, it's linguistic minority. And so, for the definition, I have a person's deafness is measured by two things. They believe the word deaf with a lowercase d refers to an audiologic lack of hearing, which means they refer to their deafness as a medical disability instead of something that they accept openly. While on the other hand, we have deaf with the capital D, which is cultural identity, which are the ones that are actually involved in the deaf culture. They use ASL as their main communication, and they communicate with other deaf people that identify themselves culturally. So Veda, he is one of the people that I used for my paper. He's from 1975, so he uses a handicap and linguistic minority for deaf children in the schools. So he has, in his time, they were labeled handicapped. But later now, we don't call them handicapped, we call them disabled or disability. And for the linguistic minority side, it's due to being English as a dominant use of communication within that school. So English in America mostly used in schools. So anything that's not English would be a linguistic minority. So a linguistic minority is literally just native language other than English. So Veda, he was talking about how deaf children are handicapped and they have a linguistic minority, so they're labeled with two things when they enter the school system. But now they're still labeled linguistic minority because they don't speak English, but they're not labeled handicap anymore. They're disabled or they have a disability, regardless if they're capital D deaf, lowercase d deaf. The school system still categorizes them as being disabled. So now my next main point that I made in my paper was ASL in schools. So as we all know, deaf children, they grow up to 90 to 95% of hearing parents who don't sign. So that makes 10% of deaf children that are likely to grow up in a deaf family. So they're going to grow up with deaf individuals, deaf siblings sometimes. They are going to have opportunity to go to deaf schools, learn ASL, and be connected with the deaf culture, such as with their parents. Now, just because 90 to 95 people are born to hearing parents, that doesn't mean all 90% of hearing parents force their kids to learn English, of course. But so those that don't prohibit, they will still have the opportunity to go learn sign language, of course. And then for the parents that do prohibit learning ASL and want their child to be more hearing and be more involved in the hearing world and have nothing to do with ASL, they enroll their kids into lip reading classes, speech lessons, and they use auditory amplifications like cochlear implants or hearing aids. Now, lip reading. Per Ortiz, lip reading is not the best substitute of the auditory path. The difficulties involved in this practice are familiar both to deaf people and the professionals who are in charge of their education. This is because the professional is in charge of teaching deaf children lip reading, or whoever is trying to learn lip reading. The reason why it's taxing for the professional is because they have to try their hardest to figure out a way to teach someone that doesn't know the language already and teach them how to lip read. Because lip reading, you can see what you're saying, but you don't know how to pronounce it. You don't know what the word is supposed to sound like if you're deaf and you are severe or profound. You don't know what the word's already supposed to sound like. Now, from Samantha, there are 48 million people in the United States who have a hearing loss, but less than 500,000 or 1% use sign language. This means this is a statistic of how people that are deaf try to fit into the hearing world, whether it's by their parents, those that are born into hearing families and are forced to learn English, or personal influence. They grow up and they just want to be, they grow up with being in a little D category, so they want to focus on being in a hearing world instead of the deaf world. So they push their deafness aside and try to be as hearing as possible, which is why only 1% communicate in ASL. So the next one, we have the challenges in learning English. There are 6 challenges. For the first one, deaf individuals learning English require more than just being able to speak English. This is because all languages, no matter what you learn, it's not just learning how to use it. It has rules, grammar, structure, vocabulary, and so on. There's so many other things that are involved in learning a language instead of just knowing how to speak it. So for the next one from Nugroho, other than speaking, deaf individuals struggle in word processing and writing a text. This goes along with Fabretti. The sentence production of deaf students tend to be simpler, and they also produce lower vocabulary items. Those two go hand in hand because if you're signing, when you're signing the correct way of ASL, you drop specific words that you don't need to sign, which makes the sentence simpler. So when they are, for those that grow up in a deaf family, they are taught the correct way of signing. So when they translate what they sign into English, they're gonna write what they sign, which will be shorter than what you would say in actual English. This is also vice versa. For those that grow up hearing, they're gonna know how to do this, while those that grow up deaf don't know how to do this. Another one is from Provost and White. The production of lexical inflexibility is something difficult for deaf students. This means the ability to use the word in multiple parts of speech. So back to what I just said. In ASL, this is not true because in ASL, one sign has multiple meanings depending on the context. But if you're a deaf child and you are born in a hearing family, you're not going to know how to do that. So you have to basically learn that one word in English can mean different things, or one word in sign can mean different things. So to continue, our second to last one is by Spencer and Marschark. Since deaf students cannot read because they did not get enough language exposure, it is causing a problem for the deaf students, especially in reading classes, because deaf students did not achieve the same reading level like other hearing peers. So this goes hand in hand with the next thing. Many deaf children, perhaps as many as 70%, are deprived of language. That's from Doherty. So that goes hand in hand because hearing parents, some of them do not want to teach their kids sign language, and they don't want to learn sign language. So they have a language barrier in their homes. They don't know how to communicate to each other until later in the child's life, where they decide what they want to do, whether that's go the English path or the ASL path. They're being deprived of language at an early age, so they're learning later. So in fact, between the ages of 5 and 10, a quarter of deaf students who graduate from high school have only a reading level below second grade, and 3 of 10 have a reading level between the ages of 5 and 10, which is a pretty high stat. But that is highly impacted based off of the 90% to the 10%. So for the last slide, we have the strategies used in English. There are ways to teach deaf children English. So for the most obvious way, it's to use ASL in the classroom. Teach them their native language, which is ASL. The reason why I say native language, if you are born it's your language that is used mostly in your household. So for deaf children, their household will mainly be ASL. For me, my main household is English. So that would be my native language. Regardless if they're culturally deaf or not, they will benefit from learning in their native language. So from Humphreys, the use of sign language for teaching English to deaf students is important because English is not the first language of deaf students. Again, teach in your L1, not your language that you're learning now. So one challenge for deaf students in English learning is because of the late language acquisition. Again, back what I've said before, 90% of deaf children are born in hearing families. So those that don't know what to do, they don't want them to learn sign language, but they're struggling learning English. Now there's no middle ground. It's just, okay, we're not going to communicate, and that creates a barrier between everyone. Now, for those parents that allow their children to learn ASL, Roy states, the role of sign language interpreters is not only deaf students in learning English, but also contributing to the process of exchanging messages from sign language into spoken language. So if you are one of those parents that want your child to learn ASL, and you're a hearing parent and want them to learn ASL and English at the same time, if you have a sign language interpreter, their role is not just to deliver them the message, but it's also to be the barrier between teacher to student. That way everybody is on the same ground, nobody's missing anything, which is good for parents that push their child to learning ASL. And then for the very last slide, the references that I used, at the end I ended up using 15. I started off with 25, I want to say, but the other 10 I didn't think it would fit in my paper as to what I was trying to have as an end result. So I finished with 15. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.